welcome everybody to the off-the-cuff seminar of corrective exercise. I'm sure people here from all the sorts of backgrounds that we see in the group, and trainers and therapists, both class instructors. And in the time we have available, which isn't that long, 40 minutes or so, I'm not going to be standing here trying to give you specific exercises for specific problems, because there are hundreds and hundreds of different presentations and different things we want to give corrective exercise for. What I'm interested in is giving you a thought process about what is corrective exercise, how can you use it, when may you need to consider using it, and everything that is really going to drive you forward. So the first thing we've got to do is get everything working. So this general slide is going to sit in the background. This is just a mind map really of, while I was thinking about this, the kind of questions that come into our head. And we're going to work our way through them, and we'll have a chat at the end or questions at the end as to what's going on. What I'd like to do to start with is put this into a little bit of personal perspective, which is something I don't normally do. When I first started training in this field, which was way back in 1983, halfway through the first course I was ever doing in 1986, some of you who are my age or whatever will remember, the film of the moment was Rocky IV. And I would use a clip if I could, but you can't legally. In the usual training montage that they have in Rocky, we see Rocky doing all his training with a great bit of music in the background. In this particular film, we get to the training bit, Rocky's doing his training and he's running in the snow and he's lifting logs and he's doing all sorts of things like this. And Dolph Lundgren, who's the Russian boxer, seems to have managed to access very early sports science. And when his little training montage comes on, all computers appear and he's on computerized treadmills and things and gas readings. And I watched that as part of the course and I thought, wow, I want to be able to do that. That's amazing. You know, all this just lifting weights. I need to do more than that. I want to be able to measure people's muscle power and what they can generate and everything else. By the time I had learned to do that and was able to do that, it made me realize something. We don't use that kind of stuff very often at all. It was quite a disappointment, and it made me realize sometimes that you have to get to a very high level of knowledge and training, whatever, to actually realize that what you need most of the time is the simple stuff underneath. And most importantly, it doesn't matter how clever you get with your training, how clever you get with your therapy, how advanced you get. If the foundations and the basics are not there, none of it will work. And if nothing else, what we're going to look at today may suddenly make sense for some people. Oh, that's why it's not been working. I don't understand it. I've been applying everything I should, but it's not working. And at the heart of this, over that 30 years or so that I've been doing this, corrective exercise sits at the absolute heart of things being effective. And we're going to have a look at why. So all these little thoughts that I've got up here on the screen are in no particular order. I will pick one, I'll talk about it, we'll move on. And the first one I'm going to mention, because I just happen to know I did a slide on it coming up, is when somebody comes to see you, and this doesn't matter if they're coming to the gym for training, it doesn't matter if they come to see you with any kind of problem, whether it's a leg problem, a back problem, one of the first things I will do is check their shoes. It doesn't matter if they're training shoes. It doesn't matter if they're normal shoes. I will have a look at their shoes. And there's a reason why I will do that. You don't need to be able to analyze gait. Just letting someone in. You don't need to analyze gait to understand what's going on with this pair of shoes on the screen. You don't need to be able to film anything or know anything at all about gait to understand what's going on. When you look at somebody's pair of shoes, and I suggest you make this standard for whatever you do, what you're looking for, is there an equal wear pattern on the left and right shoe? And on this pair on the screen, there is not. This shoe is very worn in the toe. We can see the white coming through of the shoe. This one still has all the black covering. Now, there is a wear pattern here that will tell you about their gait, but that's not the point of this. What this tells us is that the person who owns these shoes does not walk or run or step evenly weighted left and right. They're weighting one side more than the other, and that is going to give us a problem, because when we decide we're going to put them on the treadmill or go running with them, or we want them to squat, or we want them to lunge, as the weight, the speed, the resistance goes up and up and up, whatever problem they've got in the background that's creating this favouring of one leg will eventually end up as an injury. And it's the same if someone's come in for treatment of any description. If we're having a problem that's making them weight one side more than the other, that will go up through the body, through the back, through the shoulder, right down to how they position their head to balance their body. So it's always worth getting a look down at the shoes, because it's so simple to do. We can look at the feet, we can look for under and over pronation and all sorts of things, but that's a bit of a different skill, which we have webinars on. But this looking at the shoes, anyone can do, and it's your first point of corrective exercise. That's what this person needs. Whatever it is they want to do with you, they're favouring one side or the other. And if that is allowed to continue, they will end up with some kind of problem. Now, what corrective exercise they need, that's not something, we could do a whole webinar just on that for this particular wear pattern. That's not the point. This person needs something. You can give them the most balanced, perfect gym program in the world. You can give them a perfect couch to 5K. You can give them a perfect marathon program. You can give them whatever you want. They're going to mysteriously get injured if they're showing this pattern. And that's what we're looking at. This is a bit of an example of where we're going today. We're looking at people who are going to present themselves into the gym, into your class, into your clinic, and say, do you know what? Do you need something beyond what you're asking me for? Do you need something beyond the injury you're telling me about? So this tells you a lot of things. Now, every time I press this, it should skip back, if it's acting correctly, to exactly the same slide. So we've checked the shoes. We've already worked out that we have a client who has a problem where they favour one side or the other. And we need to go off and find what that is. That's what we will use our skills for. If as a trainer, you perhaps don't have a way of testing people or working out what that imbalance is, this is where trainers and therapists should tie in with one another in their local areas so they can feed information backwards and forwards. For the trainer, it's brilliant because the therapist will be able to keep your client going while they train with you with modifications. For the therapist, if you're not big on your exercise physiology, or it's not something you do and the person's very advanced with their training, then the trainer can help you out, and you can do wonderful something synergistic working with that. So let's have a little look around this one. I've got people still coming in, so I'm going to pick somebody else. Probably one of the most important things we can check on people, we've had a look at their shoes, they're coming in for whatever they need doing. Let's check their core, basically. Let's have a look. Let's see what they're doing, because everybody wants to train their core. Everybody talks about core. There's lots of different ideas out there about what the core is. And for those of you who've been on these webinars a lot, you know I will go core, because it's more than just one area. It's a lot of things. It's a bit of an umbrella term, but we're talking all about the stability through the body, as far as I'm concerned. But in this case, we're heading towards that midsection where we would traditionally talk about core. Why would we check someone's core? Well, obviously we want to know if it is functioning and if it's strong, if it's any good. But what I really want you to be able to look at and think about is, does it need corrective exercise? Because a lot of people out there will be doing core work, and that's not necessarily effective. And there's several ways you can tell, and we'll try and have a look at those next. Here we are. With this particular slide here, the slide up here on the left-hand side, this is a view down. This is a cross section through the body. All of these muscles on here either connect or don't connect into the thoracolumbar fascia. And you can go back and look at thoracolumbar fascia, but the thoracolumbar fascia is a major, major stabilizer of the spine and the pelvis, and therefore it's massively important in the core. And if you look at some of the muscles that attach to the blue, you'll recognize them as traditional core muscles anyway, transverse abdominis, all the lats and all sorts of things going on in there. Anything that attaches into thoracolumbar fascia is part of the core. But the question is, has this person I'm seeing who is injured, or they've come to me because they said, I'm training my core really hard and nothing's happening, it's not working, I need your help. We need to know if they have been working it correctly. And there are several ways to tell. I've got pictures here, and I've got pictures for a reason. The picture that I'm waving my cursor over now is a normal back. This person has some back pain, therefore they are kind of holding their back and saying, ow. But if we look at it, it's fairly plain. It's fairly even, left and right. If you look at the person next to them, down the same side they're holding their hand, there's this massive bulk of musculature that I'm taking the cursor up and down right now. And that's multifidus, bam, standing up massively, but it doesn't matter whether it's erector spinae. We shouldn't see muscles like that standing up in the back, unless you're the gentleman with the shorts here. Because he's been bodybuilding, he's developed those muscles on purpose. They're going to show, and it makes it very hard in him to decide whether or not the deeper spinal stabilizers and core are functioning or not. However, we have different tests for him, which I'll talk to you about. For your normal person with normal back musculature, if we see these large back muscles visibly on show, it's because the deep spinal stabilizers, the deepest level of the core, is not working. They've worked some of the core muscles, but not all of them. And this is why they're not making progress. So we don't want to see this kind of image. Now, if we have this gentleman come in, we have a slightly different trick. If you have a gym ball, and again, we have a webinar available, a past one that covers all in-depth assessment of the spine, the core, the spinal stabilizers. If you have a gym ball and you sit the client on the gym ball, ask them to sit nice and upright, fold their arms or put them by the sides, get their arms out of the way, and then you just ask them to do a very slow leg extension into the air in front of them. Their body should stay, just as I am here, still and bolt upright. If before they lift their leg, they do what I'm about to do and they lean, before they even take their foot off the floor, if they lean to one side, it's because they're not able to activate the deepest muscles of the core. And what they're doing is using the large muscles to lean them off to one side to create a counterbalancing action. They shouldn't have to lean if the entire core is working absolutely correctly and all the muscles are coming in together. They will lift their leg out in front of them without leaning and ask you what the problem is. And that's a very useful test for this chap. And as I say, we have a webinar on that in detail that could be useful. The point with the deep spinal stabilizers is a lot of people have not heard of them. Rotatories, transverspinalis, interspinalis, very, very small muscles that exist only between each vertebra, whose job is to keep space between the vertebra, alignment of the vertebra, to keep the vertebra in effectively extension, which holds you upright, holds your spine in the correct position, gives the correct spacing, the correct room for the nerves, the correct pressures on the discs. Those muscles, the really, really deep muscles, they are not under conscious control. You cannot sit there and say, I want to engage rotatories. You can with your transverse abdominis. You can say, I want to pull that in, and you can do it. You can engage your obliques. You can engage your rectus abdominis. You cannot actively and voluntarily engage rotatories and interspinalis and these muscles. They are part of the body's planning system, movement planning system that happens in reaction to what's going on around you at a subconscious level, no more than you could stop your heart by sitting there saying, I want my heart to stop. No, I want my heart to stop. Why is it not stopping? Because it's something you don't want to stop. And you don't want to stop your spinal stabilizers either. But modern life, injury, all sorts of things we come across can actually take them out of commission. And the ball is the way of getting them back. But also, if you do detect, and you may have to look into this a little more, if you do see evidence that the deep spinal stabilizers are not working, the easy way to bring them back is we have to offer instability into core work. So if we went for the traditional plank on the floor, we wouldn't hit these deep stabilizers, because we can brace through our arms, we can brace our legs on the floor, we can create body tension in the middle, all without meaning to. If you were to take the gym ball or a Bosu and you were to put the arms or the feet onto the ball and then try and plank, we haven't got something we can wedge ourselves against. We haven't got something we can push against. We can't lock the body between two fixed points. And what you'll find, this is another nice little test, if someone doesn't have back pain, you could take the gentleman with the shorts, ask him to plank on a gym ball and ask him to plank normally on the floor, and watch the difference between the two. There's a fair chance he'll plank for a couple of minutes on the floor and say, what's the problem? He'll probably be a sweating, gibbering mess after 15 seconds of trying to plank on the gym ball if the deep spinal stabilizers aren't working. If they're not working, there's a lot of ramifications, because we're going to have compression of the discs, we're going to have vertebrae that can shift, shear, potentially misalign. Not good when you have a large weight on your shoulders, not helpful if you've got back pain, if you're a therapist. So checking out the spinal stabilizers is another very, very important way of deciding, does someone need corrective exercise? I'm going to go back through to here, to the pelvis, because there's something else we're going to look at, and we may as well talk about it now because I'm mentioning it. Learn to look at somebody's pelvis. Everything we've got in here today, if you're not sure, look online. If you're not sure online, we have a webinar for every single thing that's on here in our past collection. The pelvis should sit, give or take, with the ASIS here, if you know what that is, and the PSIS here, roughly level. Yeah, a few degrees tilted forward is not too bad. But if you're used to looking at a pelvis, and this is a very useful skill for a trainer, you could go online and learn to just look at what a pelvis looks like when it's in alignment. If somebody's pelvis is out of alignment, it has enormous knock-on effects. If it's tilted forwards, then we get shear forces starting to go through the spine. If it's tilted backwards, then we start to get too much of a curve in the spine. We get shortening of the hamstrings, lengthening and pulling potentially on the patella of the quads. I could go on all day about the knock-on effects of what happens when your pelvis moves. In this example here, we've got a rotation forward on one side, which is very common. But when you rotate your pelvis forward on one side, you take the acetabulum, the cup in the pelvis that the femur goes into, it moves closer to the floor, but your leg's still the same length. So how does it get there? How do you actually tilt in the first place? You have to twist the leg in and tip your foot over into pronation to allow the pelvis to roll forward on one side. And it would work the other way around. If you know how to look at overpronation, the foot is overpronated, the leg will twist in, and the pelvis will rotate forward, which is really why I've picked these things, because you can go back and look around them and use other webinars as much as you like to really get the hang of this and to learn what's going on. The point is, your pelvis shouldn't tilt. It should be level. Unless you have a leg length difference that's genuine, or unless you've had an operation on your knee or hip that's changed your leg length difference, in which case there should be some kind of adaptive orthotic in the person's shoe. If somebody's pelvis is not straight, in the gym or in the clinical setting or in a class, and you'll get used to seeing this very quickly just by glancing at somebody in their workout gear, it means that their deep spinal and pelvic stabilizers can't be working. And we've just talked about those. So it's yet another clue. The way it looks, whether or not they could plank on or off a ball, whether or not they've got that musculature in the back, and whether or not their pelvis is level, tells us all about whether or not their core is truly functioning properly as it should. And if it doesn't, we have all the problems I talked about just now with compression of the vertebra, nerve spaces, pressure on the discs. But you can add into that all these problems with pelvic stability and position, which have knock-on effects through the knees, the feet, and all the way up through the body to the shoulders as people start to twist and turn and then tip their head the other way as well. So absolutely, if we're going to help people in one way more than another, let's check that their core is actually working absolutely correctly. And if not, we can retrain it. And I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. To train the deep spinal stabilizers, we don't need more planks, side planks, reverse bridges, wood chops. We don't need anything like that. We need unstable surfaces, BOSU, gimbal, stability disc, wobble cushion. We need to start doing lunges, squats, planks, all sorts, even your wood chop exercise and things. Start to do them on an unstable surface, and we introduce the need for the smaller, finer muscles deep in the spine and pelvis to do some work. So if I go back to our mind map, we mentioned under core historical, and that's what I'm talking about. You can ascertain whether somebody has good spinal stabilizers and good core function. You don't have to look, you don't have to put them on a ball, you don't ask them to lift their shirt to look at their muscles. You can get a feel for it when you're chatting to them. What kind of core work do you do? I do planks. Okay, do you do anything else? Yeah, I do wood chops. Do you do anything else? Yeah, I do some reverse bridging. And do you do anything else? No, but I do it, 9 times a week. Try and ascertain, has their core work involved instability in some way? And if it hasn't, add it in. That is your corrective exercise for the core, basically. And I can assure you, 99.9% of times you'll find that instability has not been part of their core training, and we know we're lacking. Let's make our way around this map a little bit more. Some of these, I just want to throw you in the right direction to make you think. Way back in the day, before I became a therapist and while I was still a trainer, to be honest, right back when people were still saying what even is a personal trainer, one thing we were taught very strongly on one of my original courses way back in the early 90s was check the muscle balance. Now, I guide you to the internet or your books for this, but be aware what muscle groups should be stronger and what should be weaker. Should the back or the rhomboids be stronger than the pecs? Should the quads be stronger than the hamstrings? What should be stronger, the triceps or the biceps? Check these things out. Learn how to test that. You can test that by putting your hands on and asking someone to pull and push you. You can use your weights in the gym to test that. If you know what the ratio of strength is from pec to rhomboids, you should be able to get them to try and exercise, and you will know how much of each they should be able to push. It is crucial because as you get older and older and older, you get more and more and more imbalances from work, from habitual postures, from driving, from sports that you play that are one-sided or repetitive actions. And a lot of older people want to get into physical activity. And we can give them a program that is perfectly well balanced on paper. But if we haven't checked their muscle balance to start with, and they already have very protracted shoulders and very tight pecs and very weak rhomboids, it doesn't matter if we give them the correct ratio of front to back work. If the starting ratio was wrong, we will just train the same imbalance, but to a higher level. So make sure their starting balance is correct. And for a lot of people, you may have to start a training program that brings them back to the correct relationship between muscle groups before you start them on a bigger program. It may also be why they're not progressing. It's the same in the therapy setting. You may be struggling. You may have assessed somebody, you've given them some rehab exercises, the rehab exercises aren't working. Learn to, if you haven't already, check the muscle balance. Have they already come with an imbalance and they've now got an injury on top of an imbalance? And you're treating the injury, but you haven't noticed the imbalance. Okay, corrective exercise, honestly, it's at the heart of everything. What else have we got? We've checked the pelvis, we've checked the shoes, we've checked the core. I can't see what that one says there because the gallery is over it. Let me see if I can move it for a moment. Check posture. We'll come back to that in a minute. There, I've brought everybody back. The posture I will come back to because I want to look at that as well. Must offer instability in core. We mentioned that. Here's a good one. Tight muscles acting as weak. This is one that therapists may come across a lot, but it's a very useful one for trainers to know as well when we're testing somebody at the start, when we're getting a feel for what exercises should we be giving them, what program would suit them, whether that's rehab or whether it's training. If a muscle is tight, it is by default, that's our muscle fibers, that's our sliding filament theory, which is under question, by the way. But if a muscle has gone tight, it's because it's already semi-contracted, like that. And when you ask it to then shift a weight or work against the resistance of a therapist, it appears weak because you can't get full contraction because it's already starting from a position where it's semi-contracted. And it's very common to accidentally think these muscles are weak and start training them. And if we take a muscle that's too tight and will be imbalanced, which is why it's become too tight, and we start giving it more and more strengthening, we're going to make things worse. There's an easy way to test that. If the muscle is shortened and tight, if we lengthen it and retest it, we will only get one of two results. And we can lengthen it as a therapist by trigger pointing it, acupuncturing it, myofascialing it, stretching it, massaging it. As a trainer, you can stretch it. So let's say for argument's sake, we suspect that someone's got a very weak hamstring, which would be a classic. We could put them on the machine, put them on a hamstring curl. We could see what they could curl, make a note of that, give them a couple of hamstring stretches to do for a couple of minutes and redo it. If that hamstring is weak, nothing will change. If it was tight and you just stretched it out, you've now given it more distance to contract over so it can generate more power, the weight they move will go up as the result of a stretch. That tells us that muscle was tight. That also tells us, because every one of these on this list, they tie into one another. That's the problem. That's what can get complicated. It tells us they've got an imbalance somewhere, or they've overtrained it. They've done something to make that muscle tight. But you can do that as a therapist as well. Give it a quick massage, retest it by hand if you need to, or with a yellow band or a red band or a resistance band. If you can create a change in muscle strength through loosening it, it was too tight, not weak. And now we know we find an imbalance somewhere that we need to address and correct. Here's a big one. This is much more for therapists now, so hold in there if you're a trainer. Checking the starting position on tests. This comes back to posture, which I'm going to go to in a minute. But let's take the shoulder for argument's sake. If somebody comes in to me and says, oh, I've got this terrible pain on my shoulder, I fell off my bike and I put my arm out and we're doing all these sort of things. And our brain thinks, I wonder if they're AC joint. So, okay, you might start to do a scarf test like that. Now in the books, the scarf test is for the AC joint and we'll load the ligaments in the AC joint and the person will say, ow. The real key here is working out, did that person start in the correct position in the first place? Because when we do this, we don't just bring our shoulder across, other things happen. We compress at the front, we compress the joint at the front, we bring the joint surfaces closer together, we open it out at the back. If the person starts with a protracted shoulder, if they're already here, because that's their posture, they're already likely to be having some sort of impingement syndrome going on or about to go on. And you suddenly increase it, remembering that this sort of thing is also an impingement test here. When they say ow, it may not be their AC joint at all. So what I will sometimes do if I'm not sure, there are other tests for the joint. So we use multiple tests. But if I'm still not sure, I might go back to, do you know what? They are protracted in the shoulder. They could be trapping other tissues. They could be pressing on the brachial plexus. They could be getting thoracic outlet syndromes. I'll just do a quick stretch or trigger of the pec, and then I'll retest the action. And we know we've taken out one of the problem areas. You can apply the same principle in the gym though. If somebody isn't progressing very well with a given exercise, and we've all looked at it, are they actually starting in the correct position? And if they're not, you may have already queued them up and said, well, no, look, I need you to bend your knees slightly and bring your pelvis forward. I want you to bring your shoulders back. You need to question why are they like that in the first place? Why are they not standing straight? Why are they not starting in the right position? Why are they not actually starting necessarily with, why are they not starting with their arms completely straight when they curl? Is that because the weight's too heavy, or is it because actually they're so tight in their biceps they can't fully straighten their arm? Right, okay, let's go on to posture, because I'm talking about posture, and if I'm going to mention it, it's something we need to know. Some of you will have seen this before. Practically everybody has got the same chart, whether you're a trainer or whether you're a therapist. Most people got the Lipcott-Wilkinson chart, which actually has a gravity line down the middle, and most body charts do. Pay attention to that gravity line in this sagittal plane. It should fall on someone's body pretty much from the bottom of the earlobe where a stud would go in. It should go through the middle of the shoulder, the middle of the elbow, the middle of the pelvis, just behind the knee, and come out just behind the malleolus, just at the sort of back of the arch of the foot. That is a body that is in correct alignment. That is a body where what is fundamentally now happening is every muscle should be sitting in the correct resting tone. And if it isn't, and you have corrected it, it then can. Where joint spacings are correct, where the alignment of the vertebrae are correct, where everything's doing what it should. And if nothing else, this is something we should be trying to get people back to. And if they're not in this position, working out why. We've got 4 of the classic positions we see here, all of which you'll probably recognize, all of which are to do with muscle imbalance. They're all to do with, funnily enough, the deep stabilizer of the spine being weak, modern life pulling us forward. So if anybody walks into your gym, your class, your clinic, looking like any of these 4, sort them out. And if they don't want to be sorted out because they are not aware of it, at least make them aware. And if nothing else, they may decide to do something later on. But certainly in the gym, if I was back working in a gym or whatever, I wouldn't be wanting to start to train any of these people at all, whether it's running or weights or anything, unless it was purely corrective exercise, because I need them back here to this position, or honestly, they're going to end up with an injury. And this is why people can end up with injuries who are training correctly. It's another of those little mysteries you can unravel. We don't understand. They train well, they recover well, they eat well, they warm up, they cool down, they have a balanced training program, front to back, left to right, synergists, and everything are all working correctly, because I worked that out after this webinar. Oh yeah, I forgot to look at the posture. So if we don't do something about this, we will train this person to be an elite long jumper with this posture, or they could be an elite long jumper with this posture. And this is the problem. The training will still work, but this person will end up injured, and this person's less likely to end up injured. This person will end up retiring from sport, really, really quite crippled, as a lot of professional sports people are. This person won't. And why not apply that also to just everyday activity, just how people would want to be. So posture is something to look at, to get your head around. And I'll summarize that later on with what I'd say. Those are the big things. Those are the main things. There's other little thoughts that just flipped into my head over a few minutes as I thought about this at the last minute for today. Here's an interesting one, and they're all relating back to each other now. If somebody can't achieve the form you want them to, even though you're explaining to them, even though you're cueing them, even though you're possibly putting them into the positions you want, they just can't do it. And you're scratching your head thinking, I understand, why can't they achieve that position? Why can't they achieve that position to start my rehab exercise? Why can't they sit in that position to be treated? Why can't they achieve this position in a sport or in the gym or an activity? If everything we've talked about so far is wrong, if the posture is wrong, the core is wrong, the deep stabilizers are wrong, if the muscle balance left to right is wrong, they won't even know. They'll have adapted to it, possibly over years. And positions that you should be able to get into, they can't. It's not actually physically possible. And they don't even know why. They just go, well, I am upright. It's upright for them because that's what they're used to, but it's not upright for us. So you have to bear in mind those difficult clients. So you're thinking, why can't you just get it right? Or why have you got the kinesthetic awareness of a brick? Maybe they haven't got the kinesthetic awareness of a brick. Maybe they're stuck in one of these positions we're talking about, and we need to help them out of it. I'm going to come back to one of these in a minute. This is one of my favorites. I'm waving the cursor on it now. Demands of sport and activities away from the gym and away from your treatment space. Really important to find out what else they do when they come into the gym or your class for training, when they come into your clinic. What do you do for work? What do you do for fun? What do you do for interest? What do you do? I don't do anything. Oh, right. Well, you need the exercise then. Hang on. They don't do anything. You know, they must do something. All right. When you're not doing anything, what do you do? Well, I sit and watch box sets, really. You're like, right. shoulders forward, shortened hip flexors, potential pelvic tilt, weak core, etc. A classic for us would be someone comes in with protracted shoulders. We see that because I've talked about it. As a therapist, you perhaps release the pecs, bring the shoulders back. As a trainer, you start working retraction-based exercises. They look great after the session, but every time they come back, they're back here again. What are they doing in between that's undoing all the work you're doing, really? And that's a really important thing to think about. Cyclists are a classic. Okay, cyclists sit on a saddle, they put their hands on the handlebars, and they are now stable between their pelvis and their shoulders. Their body isn't in free space as mine is where I'm standing here. It's supported by their hands on the handlebars and their pelvis on the saddle. They don't have to engage their spinal stabilizers in any great way. So cycling is actually appalling for your core. And the biggest problem you'll get in serious cyclists is back issues. And they set the bike up and they get the bike moved around to solve it, and it still doesn't solve it. Why doesn't it solve it? Because their activity generally doesn't encourage that kind of core activation. So you need to correct that. You need to be aware if they're a cyclist and you're working with them and they've got a problem, one of the best things you can do for them is really make their core work, and also give them strategies to engage their core on the bike, which are largely based around transverse abdominis, but also getting the bike set up right. And there's a bike setup webinar, which we're just redoing, coming out, that will help you look at that. There's only a couple more. They're little observations, really. We talked about we must offer instability in core training if we're going to really get it right. Some of these are more about how does what I'm talking about occur? How do professionals like ourselves fall into the trap of going, you know, no one's going to sit here, look at this list and go, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. We're all going to go, yeah, I know all that, because you don't want to look, you know, as though you might have missed something. Most of us will, at some point, have easily missed things on this chart or not been taught them yet. Here's something to bear in mind. Young people adapt to problems very well, much better than older people. So you can get young people coming in, they can be training badly, they can be getting into all sorts of terrible habits, and they get away with it. Right? They don't get away with it by the time they hit their 40s, 50s, 60s. But even worse, somebody starts really exercise for the first time in their 40s, 50s, or 60s. They don't have that strength. You can always develop, no matter how old you are. All the research tells you, even someone in their 90s, if they start strength training, will develop as a ratio exactly the same as a young person. It'll be slower. As a ratio of development, it's still there. It's still equal. Things get tighter, weaker, habitual postures all creep in as we get older. You start to train somebody, pain, problems, injury, they come out very fast. Not so much in younger people. Okay, so just because a younger person is performing well, just because they're lifting what they want to lift or performing how they want to perform, still take a look at them if you're working with them and make sure you correct some of the things we've talked about today if they're present, or they will have problems later on. Because corrective exercise isn't always about correcting what someone's coming in with that's painful. It can just literally be your job. You see your job as to allow that person to engage in their sport or activity lifelong without injuring themselves. Let's get preventative. Let's make sure we don't have to do corrective exercise based around pain later on in their lifetime. And it ties into this, and this hasn't really got so much to do with corrective exercise. It's just say it worked for me. But this is a sort of background theme that exists very much in the training world. Well, it worked for me, therefore it must be right. It worked for Arnold, it must be right. It worked for Mo Farah, it must be right. No, it worked for them, largely because they were all young at the time and they can adapt very, very well. But anybody who's been in the training world long enough will know that it's a very difficult line to tread between actual physiological and biomechanical sciences and advancements in the way things happen and history. Yeah, but it's always been done like this. This is the way we do it and it works. You know, and you know what the thing with training is? It does work. If you lift a heavier weight, you'll get stronger. If you lift it badly, you will get stronger. If you lift it well, you will get stronger. So it always appears to work. Part of the question is, what's going on with that? What's the trade-off? What are you creating? What problems are you potentially putting on down the line by not getting it right at the beginning? So a really good frame of mind to get out of is looking at an elite performer and thinking, well, that's what they do, therefore it must be correct. They're way better than that person who's giving me that advice was. They've never run 100 meters in that time. What would they know? You've got to bear in mind everyone's different. Okay, nobody who's trained them will have been daft, but there will also be individual differences in each person. Not everyone will react to a standardized program, and you have to take that into mind consideration, and that's totally separate. So let me sort of summarize what I've talked about from this here, and then we'll throw some questions open. Corrective exercise is this term that's bandied about a lot. Okay, and lots of people do it, or lots of people say, yes, we do corrective exercise, but actually, they're often only correcting what they see. They're not looking for the bigger picture. So things that honestly would help you just as a class instructor, as a trainer, as a therapist, whatever it is you do, get into the habit of, get used to what is the correct posture and are people in it. Get used to looking at people's footwear and saying, is it worn evenly or not? Get used to checking the pelvis position and get used to checking the core, and learn to check the muscle balance between groups and what that ratio should be. If you can do those few things, you're in a position to apply very, very comprehensive corrective exercise programs. I'll give you one final example, and it's a real classic. A lot of people will give balancing exercises for the tracking of the patella. If they go, oh, your patella's more tracking. It's no good, and this would explain possibly why some people have given this out and the client never gets better. If the patella is more tracking, you've got to find out why, as obvious as that sounds. You can't just give, yeah, I'm going to give you a static inner range quads, or I'm going to tape here, or I'm going to put an EMG on here, or I'm going to, if you just try to rebalance the quads to realign the way the kneecap pulls, you don't know what else is going on. If they're badly overpronating through injury or broken toe or something like this, then they're actually changing the arrangement between the tibia and the femur. And suddenly the patella is more tracking in relation to the joint. It's not a straight leg anymore. So it's always, always, always worth looking around and asking why. Why has that happened? Oh, that's not right. Well, hang on, why is that not right? Because that's not right. Why is that not right? You will eventually run out of whys, and it may be, well, I don't know, but I'll start from there. Or sometimes you'll find out that it traces back to an accident, a problem, their work, something like that. But fundamentally, just learn to look globally and then start changing everything for the better. What we're going to do is bang onto that slide there and ask people for the next 10 minutes, 12 minutes, if you would like, to unmute your mics, ask me some questions if you want to. If nobody has any questions at all, but somebody wants me to elaborate on something a little more or go back, I can do that as well. But by all means, unmute your mics and ask away.
Is this kind of your checklist of things to go through with a client when you first start? Is it kind of personal?
This for me is a checklist, but it's a checklist that I go through naturally.
Okay.
Actually, there was a time when I would have had to write this sort of thing down, because it's something I would have learned on a course or CPD, and I can't remember it. And at one stage, maybe about 15 years ago, I used to have an extra wide clipboard, and down the side of the clipboard was a little thin bit of paper with all the additional questions I'd learned on the last degree I did. That I was like, crikey, I'd never thought of that before. I never did that. And I know I'd never remember to ask them. So yes, I actually had little cues down the side of the clipboard. And then I got really clever. Then I created client assessment forms that asked these questions. So I was actually as I looked at the form, I'd be ticking boxes going, no, I don't need to look at that. Oh, I need to ask about that. But yeah, these are all things that we'd look at. And I'll tell you why these things are here, as you asked. So it's been 30 years-ish now that I've been doing this. And it doesn't matter whether it's sorting out training programs for people or for trainers we know where it's just not working. It doesn't matter if it's treating injury. It doesn't matter if it's working with elite athletes. It doesn't matter what it is. These are the things that we see coming up as having been missed, or the person hasn't been taught to check them again and again and again, and honestly, endlessly, day in, day out. You know, like I say to them, did you check their shoes? And they go, what would I check their shoes? Well, why would they if they weren't taught to? And what's their pelvis position like? It's a very standard question for me. I can answer that in 3 seconds by looking at somebody. No, because I don't do that. It's these sort of answers you get. You don't have to be able to get your hands on things. You don't have to be able to do anything about it. You have to be able to recognize it. You need to be able to glance at somebody. If they walk into your class or your gym, your clinic, before they even sit down, you should be able to go sway back, protracted shoulders, protracted neck. You know, you might see when they stand just clues from the knee position or whatever that the leg's turning in, things that you learn to pick up very fast as someone just passes and you're like, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. I'll bear those in mind while they tell me about a problem, because suddenly when they start talking about their problem, whether it's training based or whether it's therapy based, if your mind works around this sort of mind map here, as people say things, you'll slot them in and go, yeah, I'll check that in a minute because that makes sense. So yes, it's a bit of a personal list that came out of my mind, but it's built from a few decades of things that I'm almost fed up of checking and thinking, why hasn't someone else checked this? But I know why someone else hasn't checked this, because there's different things for multiple professions here. Most of us are only trained in 1 or 2 professions. Okay, myself and Gina, as you've probably seen if you're on the site, because we're old, and because it's been our entire life, we're trained in multiple professions. And you know, not necessarily with add-on CPD courses. It's stupid, we've got too many degrees between us to be sensible, but only because, oh, that's interesting, and I've got a bit of time on the side, I'll do another degree in that. So yeah, you know, we're qualified in several professions, or we've certainly trained in some. I'm not qualified as a chiropractor, and I'm not qualified in osteopath, but I trained as both. I've just decided not to go through the final clinical years, but I gained that initial information. So I wouldn't offer any of those treatments, but it's great because it means when I view somebody, I'm not just looking as a physio and a sports therapist and a trainer, I'm also looking with the eyes of a chiro and an osteo. And it helps me, if nothing else, refer, but it also gives me a whole nother skill set that I don't have in those other professions. So the more you can gather, the more you can do CPD, the more you can get things, the better life is.
All right, thank you.
No probs. Anything else? We've probably got time for one more.
Oh, so would you assume it's like, I don't know, Tuesday afternoon, and I'm a sports therapist, by the way. Someone, you know, walks into your clinic, so they're in their like day-to-day shoes.
Yes.
Would you recommend, if they are a sports player, would you recommend checking both their day-to-day shoes and their sports shoes to see if there's like a similarity or a difference that needs to be flagged up?
You've just answered your own question.
Yeah, sure.
The fact you thought about it,
yeah,
exactly what I want everyone to do. You've done exactly what I hoped. You thought about it, you've identified and you've questioned, and all you're wanting from me is confirmation that's the correct thought. Yes, it is.
okay.
Absolutely. Okay, one of the most common things I say to people, if you're having people booked in for you, it's difficult because you often don't know what you're getting until that person arrives through your door. Okay, it matters not that our clinic is permanently full and that we have to send people elsewhere because we can't fit them in. People still ring me on my mobile and they still ring Gina on her mobile. Okay, we went through a short period where we had a receptionist and it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is we didn't know what was coming through the door. And people come in and they say, oh, I've got this terrible cycling injury. You're like, oh, if I'd have known, I'd have got you to bring your bike in. or yeah, I've got this knee injury, right, I'd have asked you to bring different pairs of shoes in. So it's very handy if you're in a position to speak to your client before you see them. And it's not unusual for me to say to people, can you bring a pair of each shoes you have in? So bring me a pair of the shoes you work every day, a pair you do the gardening or go for walks in, bring me a pair of shoes you wear when you go out for the evening. And what you'll sometimes see is identical wear patterns throughout all the different shoes. And you're like, they do this all the time. That's why they've got a knee problem. That's why they've got a hip problem. Or sometimes you'll only see it in one particular kind of shoe. And it might only be in the work shoe, but the running shoe may look great. And you're like, that's strange. Why would the work shoe be worn? Well, that's fine, because that's the right thought process. You start saying, well, what do you do at work? What do you, and they start to show you what they do, and they just show you that they twist and shuffle around. You're like, oh, that's why it's worn. But no, absolutely. Get a comparison between the lot.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. Do you know what? Because we started a little bit late, I've got to do one more.
I was just going to ask, when you were talking about checking the footwear and stuff, would you refer, is there ever a time where you refer to podiatry?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. I'm not a podiatrist, basically. I've got a lot of knowledge biomechanically and a lot of personal experience of lower limb mechanics and injuries, things like that. But do you know what? If it doesn't react pretty quickly to the sort of strengthening work and kind of learning fine movements of those areas, if that's not working, no, straight off to a podiatrist, basically. And yeah, I work with a few podiatrists, so I have a network of about every kind of therapist in the world around me, basically, and they will refer to me and I'll refer to them. Okay, and I'm in a luxurious position where I'm at that age and stage of my career where I'm referring, or the people I'm referring to and the people who are referring to me, we're referring between peers, which is quite nice. But I've always done it. Even when I was very junior in what I did, I purposely surrounded myself with friendly but more experienced therapists and people who I could refer to, because it helped me develop. It helped clients say, okay, Ian might not be able to sort something out, but he will know someone who can. And as I got more and more experienced, those people would start referring back to me. And that's a useful mechanism for yourself while you're learning as well, because the classic was, it was a long time ago, maybe about 94, 95, I met an osteopath at a climbing wall. Someone introduced me and said, oh, this is Ian, he does whatever. And this guy obviously knew what I was on about. I was quite in awe of him, etc. And I had a good conversation with him, but I never really spoke to him again or met him again for about 15 years. And then it turned out that his clinic was around the corner from mine, and I had somebody else struggling with and couldn't get better. And I thought, I wonder, I'll send them to that chap. And so I sent them round. He'd remembered me, which was nice. He treated them, and he sent them back. I sent him a few more people over the years. And then what actually started happening was he said, you know what, Ian, he said, I'm quite interested in what you've done. You've done things that I don't know about. Start bringing these people over in lunchtime. We'll use it as CPD. I'll show you what I do. You show me what you do. We'll come up with a solution. And then I reached a point one day, and this guy had, been head of the osteopathic council and everything. He's very, very, very good. He's come up to retirement now. But I sent him somebody one day who I could make no progress with at all. And I went round, he looked at him, we sort of sent the client away, and he said, you know what, Ian, he said, there's nothing you haven't done that I wouldn't have done myself. He said, I don't know where to go with this. And I thought, oh, wow, I've just reached your level. Oh. That's felt so good to go, oh my goodness. And now it's the other way round. It's brilliant. Martin will send me people. We go, Ian, I don't know what's going on. Can you check this person out for me? And I still do it the other way around. So it's a great way of judging for yourself how you're progressing. And it's the same in the training world as well. You start off very much, what sort of shouldn't I be doing? But if you've got more experienced people to bounce off and other professions to bounce off, it's amazing how much it will progress you. It really will. Okay.
That's great, thank you.
Well, I hope that was useful. As I say, it was a little more thrown together than our things normally are, and it was based largely on what I've experienced and seen over the last 30 years or so. But if you've got any big questions about that, if you've got any problems, you can do what we always say, you can PM us and we'll try and come up with an answer. Otherwise, anything I talked about today, if you're a subscriber, there will be a past webinar you can access as part of your subscription package in the subscriptions little store on the website. There'll be an answer to all these things I've talked about today. If not, you can buy them individually anyway. I can't remember what they are, £9–10 or something. There's a webinar for nearly everything I talked about today if you want to know more about it. Okay, thank you very much.